We're broadcasting. Good evening, everybody. It occurs to me to talk about spiritual teachers. I expect many of you have been to see a bunch of spiritual teachers. How many of you have seen Jeff Foster, Adyashanti, Bentino, Francis Lucille? Thank you. Yeah, I should give you them. So, in modern spirituality, I don't know if it's just in this country, if it's just a sign of the times, there seems to be a kind of a consumer mentality in all of this spirituality stuff, where a lot of people seem to sort of go to see these various speakers talk as if they were going to a movie or going to a show, to sort of, maybe not necessarily play them off against each other, but okay, give me your best shot, show me what you got. And then you go see someone else and show me what you got. And it's kind of, in a subtle way, this may be a kind of more about the teacher than about you. And in actual fact, of course, this whole spiritual issue, this whole question of spirituality is completely about you. It's not about me. It's about you. Why are you here? What are you getting out of it? What are you bringing to it? What are you going to have with it a month from now, a year from now? And the point of having a spiritual teacher in your life, to any degree, for an evening, for an hour, for a month, for years, is as an accessory and as an aid to your investigation of your situation, of your own nature, of your own functionality, and what really is going on here. So this is an intensely personal and intensely individual quest, and if you're genuinely drawn to this, you know it. It's something. It's a hunger in you. It's a driving force, to whatever extent it is in you, to address these kinds of questions of, well, what am I? What's going on here? What's really happening? Is life really just this shallow game you play, and you're trying to make more money than the next guy, and then you die, or what? Is there more to it than that? Another aspect of this, which is associated, is the issue of community. It can be very easy, you go to these kinds of talks and you see the same faces, and you go to another talk and there's the same bunch of people and say, "Oh, hi, how you doing? Gosh, I haven't seen you for a few weeks. How's it going?" And so it's easy to form this sort of sense of community. And that's very nice. There's nothing wrong with having friends and all that. But again, spirituality is intensely personal. It's about you. It's about where you are. It's about what's going on with you, not about other people. Everyone else is in a different place than you are. Everyone is in a different situation. Their essential spiritual issues, maybe not at core, but in terms of the details, are unique and different than yours. The kinds of things you're grappling with, the specifics of what you're grappling with, are going to be quite different than the specifics of what other people are grappling with. So this is a very personal inquest that you are involved in, to whatever extent you are. And that, of course, differs from person to person. Some people are just completely driven and motivated and obsessed, and this is their whole focus of their life. Other people are more, gosh, these are really some interesting issues, and it feels like it has some meat to me, but it's not necessarily something that I feel possessed by or obsessed by. And there's no right or wrong way. However you are is real. That's where you are at the moment, and that's what you have to work from. But again, this kind of a group mentality or group attitude or joining a group, becoming a member of a sangha or something, can sort of mask this fact and inculcate a kind of a thought of, well, we're all in it together, we're all kind of in the same place, we're all sort of here participating, kind of like going to church and you're a member of the congregation and you're all kind of a flock, And it ain't like that. It ain't like that. These questions are about me. These questions are about you. These questions are about you. And they're intensely personal. And they're intensely actual. They're about what's really going on with you, for real, in your life, here and now. Well, anyway, that's what popped into my head to talk about this evening. If you'd like to chat about anything, we have a microphone if you wouldn't mind speaking into it. That way people who are online can hear what you have to say. And I recommend, if you're not talking or you're not engaged in conversation, I suggest you spend your time noticing what this experience is like. The experience of being in space, the experience of having awareness, the experience of having intelligence, the experience of having light shine within your consciousness, the experience of hearing sound within your consciousness. It's a very interesting phenomena, and it's autonomously doing itself, and no one knows what it is. That's kind of interesting. But here it is. So you can look for yourself. You don't need to rely on authorities. You don't need to rely upon someone else's pretty picture of what's going on. You can look for yourself and see what this is.
Since I'm sort of the newcomer, but I've been finding the more I search, the more I get super anxious.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's giving me panic attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't stop searching.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes I think if I do keep searching, I'll be less and less functional. I was going to say go nuts, but I don't really think that.
Mm-hmm.
I just,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if I'm just blaming the searching on something that might be other things, or
Mhm.
maybe the panic attacks are part of the search and finding out that I don't like the things that I'm functional for so much.
Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering, so this last bout came up reading a meditation book and reading an example of Mr. Miller, who's this example guy, who gets, his heart starts hurting him when he gets choleric. And
Mhm.
so the teacher in this book is saying, well, you should not be like Herr Miller. You should not, get emotional like this. It's going to hurt you. And so, boom, 20 minutes later, this bout of 1 week now of panic attacks started. So I'm not sure whether I can really blame the search on a stupid example. But that's exactly where I'm coming from right now, is I don't know whether to keep searching, whether it's harming me.
Well, what kinds of things are you doing as you're calling searching, aside from reading these books and things like that?
Actually reading.
Uh-huh.
I'm a reader.
Okay.
And so
What kind of books have you read?
Well, I think the ironic thing is that because I tend to be anxious, I wanted to learn to meditate.
Right.
And but reading about it at least is freaking me out.
Right.
And it seems like it's giving me insomnia.
Right,
Whereas
I can imagine.
slept pretty well before.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well,
so I don't know. So maybe I'm not supposed to read. Maybe I'm just supposed to do.
maybe. Yeah.
It's
Well,
just
a lot in meditation in particular, there's a lot of different schools of thought of what that means and how to go about it. And most of them, or let's say many of them, are very specific, and you're supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do that, you've got to watch out for this, you've got to do that. And so it's, it can be kind of piling on a lot of rules and regulations and do's and don't do's and cautions and watch out for this. And so it's sort of, it's like joining a police state or something. So on the contrary of being something that's letting go or relaxing or moving into ease, it's kind of a, approaching it can seem like it's kind of entering this rigid, sort of police state. You have to do this, you have to do that, do it this way, don't do it that way because that's wrong, and so, I can imagine, there's a lot of books out there, and just because they claim to be about a topic or just because they claim to be spiritual doesn't necessarily mean that they are, let's say, either what's exactly right for you or in general very high quality. I mean, anyone can write a book, and you just have to publish it, and then so there's 1,000 books out there about meditation, and then just 1,000 guys who wrote a book about meditation, and they may even have an Indian name or something, which lends it a certain kind of a romantic spirituality, but that doesn't there's no guarantee that the book is valuable, accurate, or right for you. Having said that, my advice to you is to play around with paying attention to what your experience is like. If you're going to meditate, you're going to be doing it in your experience. And here your experience is right now. There's this mysterious awareness that's there. You're able to see, you're able to hear, you're able to think. All of these strange things are appearing spontaneously in you. There's an intelligence, there's a certain amount of intuition, there's an honest desire for fulfillment, for expansion, for meaningfulness. And that is where you're going to be doing any meditation anyway, whether or not it's formally structured and within some tradition or more loose in general. So if you ever do genuine meditation, you'll be doing it in this context that your experience is right now. So, I would suggest you just meditate yourself. Be in this awareness, be in this experience, relax with it, trust it. You have to trust. If you can't trust your experience, what are you going to trust? Because that's what you are. That's what you have. So let's relax in it, trust it, feel it, be open to it, and above all, entertain the notion that it's much, much more than you're used to thinking it is, and much subtler than you're used to thinking it is, and yet it's available, it's present, it's right here. Your experience is here right now, right? So you have access to it, and you can be with it, and let it reveal its subtlety, let it reveal its nuance, let it reveal its fullness. It is what supports you, it is what you live in, so it's got to be trustworthy.
So just ignore the fear?
Yeah, well, I would say rather than, you don't solve that by wrestling with negativities, you just empower them. You're acknowledging their importance. Whereas just by bypassing them, you're disempowering them. You're saying, well, yeah, that's there, but who cares? It's just a little thing. There's fear, but there's also hope. There's also interest. There's also aspiration. There's all sorts of forces. So just because there's fear, you're trying something a little new. Maybe you're trying something. You're going into the unknown. And it's natural to have a certain amount of apprehension about that. But you don't necessarily need to build up a catastrophic expectation or the expectation of something, you don't need to catastrophize. Imagine, oh my God, this is going to be terrible. I'm going to start meditating and I'm going to have a nervous breakdown and my heart's going to stop and I'm going to have a stroke and I'm going to go insane, I mean, it's easy to have those sort of fantasies, but you can have any sort of fantasy. But here you are sitting here, and things are pretty much okay, right, at the moment. I mean, just the sky isn't falling, and no one's throwing anything at you or insulting you too badly or anything, right? So there's an okayness. It's here. So there's nothing to be afraid of right here. So you can be with that. Feel that actual okayness that's here. And if some fears come up, it's okay. It's just a little thing that's there. But go to the positive. Don't grapple with the negative. Because grappling with the negative is just spending your time with negativity, spending your time with, emotion, with sort of a torqued-up, fantasy-based emotionality. And what's there for you? Whereas in this okayness, in this openness, in this just present awareness, there's nothing particularly scary. Doesn't look like, right? Mm-hmm. So you can notice that and say, well, yeah, this isn't really so bad. And then be with that relative okayness, and the fear will tend to subside because it'll eventually get the message, there's nothing really too threatening here, is there? And you don't need to try anything extreme. You don't need to, you study meditation, and it's just, you could go with the Tibetans and they'll tell you to, visualize this, and, it has to be this color and this size, and if you do it wrong, then you'll have the curses of the guardians upon you, and blah, 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 But that's very, very sort of Baroque and complex. You don't necessarily need to do that. Just be with the openness of this present awareness and feel its ease, its effortlessness, the way it's doing itself. And it is you. And there's just this easy spontaneity, this smooth flow. Time just keeps smoothly moving, right? The light keeps smoothly shining. And there's an okayness in that. And you can just feel that okayness and let it show you what it is, because it's subtler than what you're used to thinking it is. No one knows what this is. It's a mystery, and being with that mystery is very beautiful, and more than that, very revealing, because the mystery will show itself to you if you're just with it gently, relaxedly, matter-of-factly. So that's my advice.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
So I want to pick up on the thread of where we just were there. I liked what you said, and it makes perfectly good sense. And sometimes, like with me, it's like the fear and the anxiety and the panic. You say, well, just disregard it and notice that, everything is okay right now. Here I am, I'm breathing, I'm comfortable, blah, blah. But to me, that's far easier said than done.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just overwhelmed and consumed at times by my own, negativities and fear. Mm-hmm. So while I agree with what you say, putting it into practice seems like another story.
Yeah. Well, it's an art form. You have to feel your way into it. You have to learn. You learn the lay of the land of your own psychology and play to your strengths. So you may have fearfulness, you may have anxiety, but you also have curiosity, you also have aspiration. You got out of the house and came over here tonight. That's not an act of fear.
Right.
It's an act of, whatever it is, you can address that for yourself, but it's an act of reaching out, it's an act of exploring, it's a very positive move. It's a very self-actualizing move. So there may be fear and anxiety present, but it's not the only thing that is present. So, and again, the trick is not so much, in my opinion, about disarming the fear and anxiety. The trick is about giving your attention to your assets, give your attention to the things that you can work with that are positive, that are dynamic that are moving towards unfoldment, moving towards new terrain, new possibility. And again, it's something that you have to feel your way into in your own way, because you have your own unique psychology and your own unique, assets, strengths, and liabilities in terms of your sort of psychological habits and so on. We each have different situations to work with, and we have to develop a personal recipe of what works. But again, in my experience, fighting with and trying to correct things we hold to be negative is ends up just wallowing in and continuing to engage and ultimately feed those things that we consider problems. Whereas just going somewhere else, so to speak, within your energy system tends to devalue these things. You're saying, yeah, you're there, but I'm not going to give you all my time. I'm going to give my time over here to something that's more interesting to me. And then gradually, over time, our engagement with our energy can shift. And we can move out of habitual ways of being engaged or being, crushed by our difficulties or our, negative obsessions or whatever, and we can gradually, have more dynamism, have more opportunity in terms of other modes of functioning. And it can be very gradual. It can be something because we're basically retraining ourselves, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, I like the idea of refocusing my sort of attention, but like when my negativities, obsessions are strong, it's not so much that usually the choice is either to grapple with them or to indulge them. And I wind up being fairly indulgent, much to my own detriment, I think. And so I hear what you're saying, that the way through is to recognize that they're there, thank them even.
Thanks a lot.
And focus your sort of attention, on perhaps, like your strengths or something. But I mean, for me, I'll sit with that. I mean, it certainly is sound sort of advice, and for me, it sounds pretty difficult, even maybe a little hopeless.
Yeah. Well, it can be difficult at times, and it can even feel hopeless. But the fact is, it's an absolute fact that you have more going on in you than just a negativity or even just a positivity. There's always just myriad of other modes that are actually present that are just wholly, maybe out of left field, or just other than whatever seems to be dominant. Mm-hmm. And that is a powerful fact. It's an asset. We can have hidden currents, and I mean, maybe or maybe not hidden, but we have a lot going on in us, and it's not necessarily all coherent. It's like we're going 20 ways at once. We're not just going 2 ways at once. It's not like
20?
Just positive and negative. We're all over the place.
Right.
And so there's all of these forces to work with, and a whole lot of them have absolutely nothing to do with our problems or our negativities, even if those seem to loom large in our experience. And so in actual fact, and in the long run, these other modes are our ally and our opportunity.
Thank you.
And that's, I really can't say that strongly enough. I mean, you may or may not be aware of it. You may or may not feel that you can really draw on these things very proactively. But in actual fact, they are there. And there's always, we're much more complex than we acknowledge necessarily. And a lot of the currents that are going on there have their own agendas, which are taking us, we know not where. And this is a great advantage. In other words, you're never stuck, even when you feel like you're stuck, because there's a shitload of things going on under the surface.
Well, it's phenomenally that you mentioned stuck, because in many ways for me would be an understatement. In fact, I would use the word generalized sometimes. But
Sure.
and you also mentioned being proactive. Well, sometimes I am.
Sure.
But
Yeah. None of us are simple. We're complex.
But there's there's a lot of inertia and sloth there too.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe so. But everything changes. Everything develops. I'm sure you're a very different person than you were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And you're going to be a very different person 10 years, 20 years from now.
I hope.
Well, I would say it's a certainty, and so there's a lot of things in play, and really that's our opportunity, is that we are more than we acknowledge, and that moreness is an asset, is an opportunity. We may grapple with our personalities and our challenges, but we're vastly more than our personalities. Our personalities are small. We are vast.
Thank you.
Hi, Peter.
Hi.
I just noticed that the whole environment of the world is has a lot of basis in good and evil and kind of struggle, and there being obstacles and helpers and all of this stuff. And my sense is that it's all bullshit, that it's really innately divine, that somehow it's innately gorgeous and divine by nature. That somehow there's that the real nature of everything is goodness and sweetness and love and no possibility of anything else.
Right.
Such a conflict. I mean, between the two worlds.
Yeah, but one is a world of descriptions and the other is a world of actuality. It's easy to describe things in terms of conflicts, in terms of opposites and dualities that are somehow pushing and pulling against each other in this eternal struggle. But that's just a description. That doesn't mean it's so. You can say that there's forces in your body that are trying to kill you, bacteria and the incipient cancers and things like that, and at the same time your life force and your immune system are battling them in a pitched battle going on. Yeah, but so you can describe it in those sort of extreme terms, in terms of sort of the two extremes that are fighting it. But, I think that in actuality it's a complex and subtle system that has an inconceivably vast range of nuances that are in a dynamic equilibrium and unfoldment with a lot of motion. And it's a complex, subtle system that works within itself, works with itself, and that this system is what we call divinity or call wholeness. And in its development, in its unfoldment, it has all of these modes of dynamism that are intrinsic to it. These dynamisms aren't being imposed on it; they are its modes. Its mode is radiant light in stars. Its mode is attraction and pulling in gravitation. But light pressure and gravitation aren't necessarily at war with each other just because they're relatively opposite. They're just both modes of this wholeness that we discretely designate as if they were separate, as if light pressure was one, light radiance was one thing and gravitational attraction was another. But they aren't. Light is gravitation, because the system that is shining is the system that is pulling, and we designate these things as if they're separate. Doesn't make them separate. Creation and destruction, the coming into being of order, and then the dissipation of that order, out of which new order arises, is not necessarily a destructive or a catastrophic process. It's just the inherent mode of this system's unfolding within itself. But then when we designate portions of this as if they were separate entities, it can seem as if they were in all this conflict and war, but that's just intrinsic to the designation. That's not intrinsic to what's really happening. I mean, look at a football game. If you watch football and you hear the announcer saying, "Oh, these teams are really having at it. They're battling. They're really doing." There's no battle going on there. This is a carefully orchestrated dance being funded by big advertising money. It's about money. It's one system that is totally coherently going through this elaborate display to make more money. There's no wars going on. I mean, sure, football players are hitting each other, but that's just an aspect of this big money-making system. So it's a wholeness that is describable as if it was a conflict. And so the descriptions don't, we run across this all the time with our semantic systems. The descriptions don't capture the actuality of the system they're trying to describe. And this system here, this, is not describable in words. It's not describable in ideas. It's not describable in mathematics. It has never been accurately described, period. So all of these different descriptions, it's no surprise that they're inaccurate. And it's not necessarily a surprise that they paint these grotesque pictures of war and conflict and so on and so forth.
But my sense is, at least it's more accurate, that it would be innately just perfection versus the idea of a battle.
Well, yeah. Well, of course. But that's what I'm saying. It's feel your being right now, right? Your experience. You're here, right? There's an isness here of your being. You can feel it. You're here, right? Your experience is here in this being. What does that being feel like? It feels like a wholeness? Feels like a fullness? Does it feel like a conflict? No, it's just this present wholeness. So just because it's describable in these conflicting terms, where's the evidence? It's always a present wholeness. Your experience, your being is always a present wholeness. Right? It's always in harmony with itself. Even if you're sick, say you're sick and you're in a lot of pain or something, you stub your toe, whatever, right? You broke a leg. It's still in the context of a present wholeness. It's just an event that is an expression of and within the context of this present wholeness. So this present wholeness is here, is real, is perfection, it's complete. It can look like anything. Can it look like a war? Sure. Can it look like death? Sure. Can it look like disease? Sure. Can it look like people yelling at each other? Sure. But it's always a present wholeness that is looking like that. It's like a dream. You can have a nightmare when you sleep in a dream, right? You can have a dream where monsters are chasing you, and yet, what context is this taking place in? It's taking place in this repose, right? The dreamer is not threatened. The dreamer is a wholeness. The dreamer is a present wholeness that is exploring these aspects of its own energy for its own unfathomable reasons, or let's just say in its unfoldment of itself, in its exploration of itself. So to try and interpret the meanings on the basis of superficial descriptions misses the point of the wholeness of the whole system that is always present.
Yeah, thank you. We're more the dreamer, we're not the dreamt.
Of course, the dream is always here. And the wholeness is always here. The wholeness of being, you can feel it. right? I mean, this being is not an abstraction. This is, right? I mean, you are here. This is you, right? You can feel that. It's not a... I mean, when I say it, obviously it's an abstraction, it's words, but you can feel the certainty of it. If I said you weren't here, it's laughable, right? It's just a certainty, it's a felt certainty that that is true. Truer than any word can be, right? And that truth, that present wholeness, is undeniable. And it's not a concept, it's a fact, right?
I kind of have that feeling everybody has this sense that there's sweetness and goodness is the essence. I have this sense that everyone has this knowledge or vision somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Otherwise, we wouldn't even be good to each other. We would be assholes, totally.
Well, I think that the nature of what this is a fullness, is a wholeness, is ultimately a harmony. And it explores many modes within itself of its own nature. And some of these modes are more chaotic and less mature, and other modes are more mature, more subtle, more inclusive. And we see this among people. You can find people who are relatively immature, and then they're chaotic, and they're boisterous, and they're not particularly fitting in with their energies, expressing their energies and energies of the situation around them very well, very effectively, very smoothly. But then you can find other people, say, who are relaxed, who are intelligent, who are present, who are not unreasonably disruptive, who can engage with things intelligently, subtly, sophisticatedly, on a more mature, kind of a beautiful, elegant basis. And, we see this in all life forms, Immature life forms are boisterous and, to some degree, incompetent. You watch puppies bounding around and bouncing against each other. They can't do much. They're playful and all that, but they're not particularly competent. And then you watch, a mature dog. Has a whole different other relationship to its energy. Say, it might be more poised, more contained, more functional. And same with humans. And again, maturity is not just a matter of age; it's a matter of sort of energy integration or sophistication, or it's sort of it's arbitrary to classify it, right? But I'm sure you might have a sense of that in your own experience. Question back there.
This is a question from the internet. What is the relationship between being and the experiencing of whatever is present?
Well, they're one and the same, aren't they? There is never being without experience, and there's never experience without being. And they're two words for the same thing. On the other hand, neither one can be defined conceptually. You can't say what the ranges of what experience can look like is. Experience can look like anything. Experience can look like deep sleep. Experience can look like a dream. Experience can look like being awake. Experience can look like being under total anesthesia, which is pretty close to nothingness. But it isn't quite nothingness, is it? And again, can you say what being is? It's self-evident. Well, this is being. It is. But, there's no way you can get a handle on that. There's no way we can define that. And where there's experience, there's being. And I think if you look, you will discover that where there's being, there's experience. If you can go to being and have no experience, that would be quite interesting.
Thank you.
And on this topic, it's a little bit related to what we were just talking about too. there's one thing happening here. There's this, there's reality, there's being, there's whatever you want to call it. How many words are there in the English language? Anyone know? I mean, I don't. Maybe 5,000, 10,000. You know, every one of these words, if they refer to anything, must refer to this one thing. So the fact that we have 5,000 words that refer to one thing does not mean there's 5,000 things. There's one thing, and all these 5,000 words, imputedly refer to different aspects of it. So this one thing, from that point of view, could be said to, well, maybe it has lots of aspects, maybe so. But it is one thing. And just because there's two words doesn't mean there's two things. We have this word being and experience. Oh my God, so what's the difference between being and experience? They must be different, there's two words, right? I don't think it works like that. There's never been anything present but experience. So there's only one object, experience. You might say, oh, but there's a wall, there's lights, there's people, there's chairs, there's a floor, there's rugs, there's a microphone, you could spend hours and hours and hours making a list of all the things that were supposedly here. And every one of them is actually just an experience. There's no wall here, there's an experience that I'm calling a wall. There's no people here, there's experience that I'm calling people. I mean, think of a dream. You can dream about anything. You can dream about the Grand Canyon being in Times Square. You can dream about a sexual encounter. You can dream about, politics. You can dream about being chased by monsters. You can dream about anything, right? And what is actually present? When you wake up, you can look back and say, what was actually present? How many people were there? How many things were there? What was there? There was nothing there but dream. There were no things there. There were no people there. You weren't even there. If you were dreaming, you're in the dream walking around. You weren't walking around anything. You wake up and you didn't even have a body there. It was just a dream, right? So you could describe the dream maybe and say, well, I seemed to be walking in this hall and I walked in this room and there were these people there and this funny thing happened and we talked and they gave me something and I took it and carried it, blah, 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 blah. All this elaborate description. But did any of those things actually happen? Were there any things actually there? The one thing that was there is the dream. The only thing that was there. And likewise, here we are here. Well, what's here? There's experience here. Right? Well, what about all that list of things we made before? The rugs in the room and the people and the lights and so on. They are references to experience. Right? I mean, look and see if that's true. So how many words could you generate about your experience right now? If you sat down and just, it was like an exercise in a graduate English class, like how elaborate a narration could you generate about what you were experiencing right now and all the details and the activities and the, implications about what was happening and what was present and what they were doing and blah, blah, blah. What would you really be talking about? You'd be talking about one thing, your experience. And you can't find anything else than that present in actuality.
Peter, you slightly underestimated the amount of words. I have it on good authority that there are 250,000 without technical or slang terms.
Nice. I stand corrected.
So if we all went away now, or all extinguished?
I'm sorry?
If we all went away now, would the rug be gone?
Would what be gone?
The rug?
Well, I don't know. What does gone mean?
Not have a presence?
Well, when you close your eyes, is the rug gone?
I could be sitting on it and feel it.
Okay, then it would be gone from your vision, but still in your feeling. So that poses the interesting issue of the multidimensionality of experience. You can be feeling something and not seeing it. Or how about if, you're standing on the rug, you close your eyes, and you jump in the air. And of course you land back. That moment you're jumped in the air and your eyes closed, Is there a rug in your experience?
Maybe not for me, but it's somewhere, right? It's still in the...
Is it?
universe.
How would you know?
I wouldn't know, but I wouldn't want to take myself so seriously to make my experience the basis of all.
What do you take seriously? Someone else's experience?
Well, I guess it depends on how much I'm hooked on my physiology.
What's it have to do with physiology?
Well, let's say if I'm dreaming,
Right?
and the dream would still have physical effects on me because I believe it's happening.
Right, wouldn't it?
So it would have a lot of truth for me.
Uh-huh. Okay.
But in any case, I don't know if we humans are the only thing. The rug has its own life, I think.
Well, yeah, but the operative word is you think. So again, you're referring to your experience.
Well, the thing is, I don't know one way or the other, but I
Right.
have a hard time understanding rationally how the rug could not be there even if I weren't there.
How could you understand how it could be here at all? How can you understand? Suppose you dreamed about a rug last night. Where's that rug now? Suppose you go to sleep now and dream about a rug, and you're looking at the rug you're dreaming about. Where's this rug then? Can you possibly distinguish? All you really know is what's present, and what you remember, which is a present activity of your consciousness in your experience.
So are we talking about what we can be certain of, or what we
Of
think
course.
has an existence?
Of course. Ideas are just ideas. Theories are a dime a dozen. Certainty is the only thing that's interesting. What can you be certain of? What can you know for a fact is true? What can you know for a fact is real, undeniably?
Sometimes I've thought that my life is just a dream. I could be just sleeping
Okay.
somewhere and people could be laughing at me for like,
Right.
oh, here she goes again. Hey,
Sure.
she thinks she's having a panic attack. Oh boy,
Yeah.
this is funny. Let's watch her.
But it's still it's real in the sense that it's something. It is. It may be a dream. It may not be a dream. It may be something other than a dream and not a dream that we can't even imagine. Maybe someone else's dream, say. I mean, who knows, right? But it's not nothing. So there's certainly a certainty that what we call, or what you call your experience, is something. All right? Is there any other certainty that you can find?
No, I just have a hard time not giving, say, that plant its own existence and saying...
Right, but you just said you're giving it its existence.
By saying that I think it might not exist outside of me, or outside of my experience.
Well, you can, but whether you think it exists or you think it don't exist, the operative word there is you think, which is certainly within your experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, look at the fact. Suppose I tell you there's a plant you've never seen that you're never going to see. Is it real?
Maybe.
Maybe, but that's an idea. Maybe is fine. But maybe is not a certainty.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's maybe. Maybe the aliens are really running everything. Maybe, whatever. I mean, maybe fill in the blank that's just fine. That's just hypothesis.
So to me, are you more real than the rug?
Huh?
Do I know that you exist?
Do you? Well, ask yourself that question. You know I exist exactly the same way you know the rug exists. The rug doesn't talk quite as much. But otherwise, is there any more or less evidence for me than there is for the rug? And all the evidence you have for both my imputed existence and the rug's imputed existence is your experience, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Sounds lonely to me, though.
Well, is it? Lonely is just it's a spin doctoring. It is what it is. Is it any more lonely than it ever was? If that's how it is, that's how it's always been. Is it lonely?
Yeah.
Well, in a way it is, isn't it? I mean, we're each alone in our experience, right? But that experience is not an emptiness. That experience is a fullness, isn't it? It has all sorts of aspects and meaningfulness and implications and richnesses, and right, doesn't it? Intelligence. It's not just a nothingness or a blankness or a dullness. So it may be lonely, but it's also rich. Right? It's also meaningful. But the point is to see what it is, to see what's actual, what's really reliably, undeniably certain, rather than to assess it or judge it or qualify it. And once we really see very, very clearly what is, then we can do the math and work out the implication. But I think a good place to start is looking at your experience.
Yeah, maybe stop talking, right?
Sure.
Another question from the ether world. If all that is experienced is gone by the time I experience it, is this experience just a memory?
What is gone by the time you experience it mean? Where are you when you're experiencing it? You're here, your experience is here. Exactly what that means, God only knows, but it's certainly the case. Whether or not it's gone by the time you experience it, that's a lot of conceptualization. But the actuality of your experience happening in real time is self-evident. Whether it's memory or not, that's just defining it conceptually. That doesn't touch the actuality. The actuality is this is here, right? Anyone argue with that? Is not this here, right? Okay, so that is the fact, and then you can say, okay, this here, let's call it experience. This here, let's call it now. This here, let's call it me, or in your case, you can say me rather than you, is it already gone or not? Is starting to get into some pretty hardcore abstraction relative to this fact, this self-evident fact, which it's just self-evident before we describe it, before we put our foot in our mouth by putting words on it, right?
So, just a little bit more, what do you mean by memory?
I don't mean anything by it. What do you mean by memory?
Well, it wasn't my question.
No, I understand. You was the...
But you mentioned, this is me now, you mentioned this experience.
Mm-hmm.
But how does that work with the experience I just had, or the experience I had last week?
Well, the experience you just had or experience you had last week are in some ways ideas or mental constructs that you're having now. So whatever else they are certainly that. And whether or not they actually bear any relationship to supposed other events that supposedly occurred is a metaphysical question which is unanswerable.
Isn't this question of what's self-evident and the words that we use to talk about that?
Right.
Isn't there an enormous amount of sort of arbitrariness over what the words we use, or even what's self-evident, or not?
Certainly the words we use are arbitrary, and you can tell that just by going to Peking. They're going to be using entirely different words than we're using. Mm-hmm. But in terms of what is self-evident, you have to ask yourself that question. Let's phrase it a different way. Is there any certainty? Asking yourself that question, is anything certain? In any terms, the most broad terms, the precise terms, any kind of terms, is anything certain?
Not for very long.
Really?
Well, it seems it keeps changing all the time.
Yeah.
So change might be certain.
Okay.
I'll maybe say that.
What is changing?
The way things look.
Okay. So there's looking. There is looking too.
The way they sound or feel.
Then there's sound too. Is that a constant? Is that a certainty that there is sound? That there is vision?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. So there's some kind of certainty. Then, if it's certain that there is sound and there is vision, is there a more primal certainty that is the case that those are specifics of? See, what I go to is what we call experience is a certainty. Mm-hmm. And then we can further analyze and subdivide that certainty and say, there's 5 senses and there's mentality and there's blah, 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 various other things. Mm-hmm. But to me, that's getting into abstractions. Whereas the fact of this, let's just say the most true sentence I can say is, this is. Mm-hmm. And if I say, what do I mean by this? I would say probably the closest word I can think of to refer to that is the word we have called experience. So experience is one of the truest, most certain, most self-verifying statements that I can think of.
Yeah. It seems like everything else after that is kind of up for grabs or up for changing all the time. Or
is an analysis of that. Experience has to be before you can talk about what it is and how it is and what is inexperience and how it works. Right? That's like another layer of sort of abstraction from the fact of, experience is, okay, then the second question is, what is that? And then that's where these other issues come in.
Yeah.
So that's sort of another layer of abstraction on top of this one fact that this is.
Which is like kind of the ground of being or whatever.
Like the ground of being. Yeah. This is, and then it starts getting very interesting from a spiritual point of view. This is certainly a fact. And if I look closely, I am is that same fact. Mm-hmm. My being, for me, is a certainty. And this experience is, for me, is a certainty, and they're the same certainty. Mm-hmm. It's not like there's experience and there's me and there's experience. It's the same being, the same self-evident fact. I am here, this is here. There's two ways of saying the same thing. Mm-hmm. Which is interesting if you look at it.
Very. Yeah. And again, I guess I'm not exactly confused, but it seems like when you add anything beyond those simple, or those kind of bedrock statements, anything else is like purely, could be whimsical or
isn't it though?
Whatever. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Yeah.
And also the mystery, the paradox of everything. Again, that seems very close to that bedrock thing, but it's still above it a little bit or something. But it makes that bedrock thing very interesting too.
Yeah,
that
absolutely. Just the discovery that there is a fact is huge. Okay, there is a fact, and that fact is so for the sake of argument, that fact is, experience is, and then, then that raises the question. Okay. How is that? What is that? What's going on there? What's up with that? And then you can begin to look at this fact and see what can I know about this? What are the aspects of it? What presents itself? What are the nuances? What are the implications? And that is spiritual inquiry. That is meditation. That is, really asking a serious question of, what am I really? What is this really? Outside of philosophical schemeworks, outside of religious dogma, just this self-evident fact. Well, okay, cool. What is it? This is very interesting. And then you don't need to go to abstractions. You're just, with your experience, looking at what it is on a very primal level. And you can do that anytime because it's always available. It's always, your experience is always right here, right? And it's interesting. It's subtle. It's not, it's nuanced, right? It's got a lot of aspects, a lot of implications.
Yeah. Thank you.
to go on maybe in that same vein a bit, as I look at experience or I don't know how to put it. I notice this, that like experience feels more vivid, more intense and tangible and chewy in a way. At the same time, though,
It feels more than what?
Than it was before.
Oh, okay.
At the same time, though, there's this. It's kind of like the question: is this? It just doesn't really make sense.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, so like you say, this is a self-evident fact, but it feels to me like I don't know. I don't know what's self-evident, and yet, and I don't know if there's a correlation or just a parallel or anything, but it does feel like the qualities of all of this feel more just much more there, much more of a range, really.
Mm-hmm.
So I really can't. It doesn't feel like I can get to this is.
Well, if you can't get to this is, where are you starting from?
I don't know. I really don't.
Okay. Well, then you're starting from an unknown. That's okay, but it's an actual unknown. If it's not actual, then it's just pie in the sky, right? There must be an actual unknown.
It's actual. I guess
right?
so.
And if it's actual, then it is.
Sure.
In some very primal sense. Or it's not actual. Right? And I don't mean to be just doing sophistry here, splitting hairs. I'm trying to point out that there is actuality. Whether it's this is or isn't this is, or whether it's whatever it is, there is actuality. In some sense, and I'm not qualifying that it is a particular actuality or some other, but there is actuality. Okay, there is isness, however it would be qualified, or whatever it turns out to be or not be. Right? Or else there's no point even asking the question. If there's no isness, then
I've been asking
screw
this
it.
question a lot and for a long time, and it feels like maybe it just feels like the so-called answer just isn't in words. I don't know.
Well, that's for damn sure.
Maybe that's as simple as what I was going to say here.
That much, I think, is a very self-evident certainty.
And in a sense, it feels like, okay, well, like it would be hard to proceed in a sense, whatever that might mean. But it doesn't.
Hard to perceive?
Proceed.
Right.
To
proceed from where to where?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what happens. As soon as I have such a movement in my mind, then it doesn't make any sense anymore. So
works for me.
So there's this kind of I don't know. It could be confusion, but then the confusion just doesn't seem to really have any have any meaning either. I mean, what's confused? I don't even know.
Of course. When you say I don't know,
yeah,
I think you're if you look at it, you might notice you're referring to I can't define it, I can't describe it. But on being undescribable, it's very different than not knowing. Knowing is direct engagement. It's not necessarily describability. You know how to walk. You can't necessarily describe how to walk. Right? You know how to drive a car. You can't necessarily describe how to drive a car. You know how to be alive in your body. You can't necessarily describe what that is or how you do it. Right? So knowing is being. Knowing is something that you are. You are doing, let's say, right?
Well,
So confusion is something we know very well. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You may not be able to
no.
describe.
I think we have an idea about confusion.
I'm not talking about ideas.
Yeah. But
I'm talking about
but as
when
soon
you're
as you go past the idea of confusion, I don't know what it is anymore.
Right, but you know it in the same sense that you know how to walk. You know confusion when you're in it, don't you?
I used to think so. It.
I'm not talking about what you think.
Well, my throat's kind of sore. If you to have confusion, you have to have a couple of ideas or some notions that are contradictory seeming. Like we
Do you?
Well, how else would you experience confusion?
I don't know. Confusion might be incoherence, and
As opposed to
a vast-
coherence.
yes, certainly,
Mm-hmm.
and a vast mode of our experience is incoherent, isn't it?
Yeah. So.
Or indeterminate, or fuzzy, or nebulous, or blurry, or
Yeah. Right.
I mean, even just as I look at you, I see you very sharply. I see the people that I'm seeing next to you a little fuzzily, and then the walls and the curtains and, over by the front door, I barely see them at all. It's very hazy and murky and indeterminate, and it would be confusing as hell if I tried to describe what it looked like as I look at you. Then I look over there, and all of a sudden you're the same. All of a sudden the door is very sharp, and you are very murky and iffy and indeterminate. So that could be described as a mode of confusion. I mean, arbitrarily. What does this word confusion refer to? Well, whatever you want it to refer to, right? It's your ball game.
Actually, that's exactly where I want to go. Is this because you often refer to this as, well, me, right? And I have there's a strong sense of this presence, maybe, I don't know, but there doesn't seem to be any sense of, I don't know how to put it, claiming it or naming it as me. It just doesn't seem to make sense to me.
Okay. Can you find a you other than this presence?
Can I do what?
Can you find a you other than this presence?
No.
Then, if there is a you, then it is this presence. Maybe there's no you. That's fine. No problem. I agree.
You agree with?
This is alone true. I don't have to drag an I into it, but if I look for I can't find anything other than this, so if there is I, that's just another word for this.
But
This is here, and I am here are completely equivalent statements to me. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily true that there is or isn't an I. But if there is an I, then it's this. But it's just splitting hairs. It's just playing with definitions. I mean, the one fact is that this is, and that's the one fact. So that fact includes my being, if any. In other words, my being is this being. So I can just cancel out the my being and just be with this being, no problem. This presence is. I mean, that's pretty clear, right? This is present, right? Everyone experience a certain presence here? Can you find anything other than a certain presence here? Yeah.
I really kind of like this Buddhist statement where you neither is nor is not really suits the occasion. You can't say really is, and you can't really say is not about it. I think that's, well, this woman on Mani, she's all about nothing, right? Anyway, I just feel more, I feel more relaxed with that one than trying to impute being to it.
Well, if it isn't, then no problem.
No, it's not is, and it's not is not. This is my comfort zone these days.
Cool.
So I just
Well,
step out.
Is doesn't define anything. It refers to something. Okay, let's forget about is and isn't. How about this? Are you comfortable with this?
Yeah, I
Okay.
can't pack it
well,
up
let's
and
just
take it home
let's
very
drop
well,
the
but-
is. Let's just drop the is and stay with this.
Okay.
When I say this is, I'm really just saying this.
No, I just mean you're so sophisticated. I thought we should go at that one a tiny bit.
Sure. No, I hear you. Yeah, but ultimately, I'm not saying it is as qualifying it as other than some is not. I'm saying
glory
this
to God.
This is as it is, which may be neither is nor isn't, but that's just a mode of being.
So that's why there was this Zen master that hit people 30 times to solve things.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
One of my favorite Zen masters, he would hit people 30 times as a way of solving these things.
He was exuberant. I would just hit them once, but I'm lazy.
They wouldn't have to come back maybe this way.
Over here.
From out there somewhere. When we close our eyes, the world disappears. All we see are flashes of light that last as long as we pay attention. When we relax, we start perceiving mental creations, and this is fascinating, but does it have any meaning in the context of nothing?
Does it have any meaning what?
In the context of nothing.
What's the context of nothing mean? To the original questioner.
Well, the question is the flashing lights and the
Right.
creative things.
Right.
I can't go beyond what's written here.
No, I understand. I'm not. I'm asking a question back to the questioner. The last notion is
Sorry,
in the.
I misread. But does it have any meaning in the context of noticing?
Oh, of noticing.
I'm sorry, that was my mistake.
Oh, yes. Good. So it was your fault.
What do I know?
Yeah, it has. Noticing is to explore what this is, to explore what is happening here, experientially, non-conceptually. And if the descriptions you just put forth are representative of experience, then it's meaningful as being experience. Experience is all meaning. Experience reveals what it is, if anything does. So if you want to know what experience is, you can go to experience. And experience in that context is ultimately meaningful. On the other hand, drawing conclusions, especially conceptual conclusions based on experience, is very iffy, of course. If this is the one fact, then all meaningfulness will inhere in this fact, the fact of this experiencing here. And so if you want to investigate that meaningfulness, where you look, of course, will be in the fact itself, in this actual presence, this actual experience, whatever it is. I will assert that it can be known what this is, but it cannot be said. And I invite you to investigate for yourself and see if that's true.
Can you say something about the human desire for eternity? Because it seems to me that it's a similar desire as wanting to put our finger on meaning of experience.
Desire for eternity?
Yes.
You mean in the sense of eternal life or permanence? Or
I think that humans, I'm assuming, no, okay, I would like to think that an essence of me would keep on going because I wouldn't want to stop being curious.
Right, sure.
But of course, I can't really rationally say that I'm anything beyond this present moment. And I find that kind of frustrating. Intolerably frustrating, but at times really very disgustingly frustrating.
Well, but see, I would suggest that if you look closely at what this present moment is, you may discover it's more subtle than you're holding it to be. Is this present moment a just? You know, if you say just this present moment, that implies there's more or an other. You know, do you know conclusively what this present moment is to want more than it? Does this present moment have a duration? Does this present moment ever end? Has the present moment ever ended?
I'm not sure. I think.
But I invite you to look into that. Has the present moment ever ended? Does it begin? Does the present have a beginning? Does it have an ending? You know, is being, which is, let's say, synonymous with the present moment. Does being have a beginning? Does being have an end?
We don't know.
Well, maybe, but look and see. Maybe we can find out.
Well, but it's the issue of death, right? We don't know. I mean, I think the whole thing about being separated from people, that would be tolerable.
Death is an idea. Death is an abstraction that you're having now. When you're on your deathbed, it will be now, and so the properties of death will partake of the properties of now. So you can discover what death is like by looking at what now is, right? I mean, you may say, this is life. What do you mean by that? Looking here and now, exactly what does life mean?
Is that a question?
Well, sure, of course. I mean, doesn't necessarily have a simple answer, but it's a good question. You know, you think you're alive. Aside from abstractions about physiology and history and so on and so forth, and biology, what experientially does that mean? All that really means is, that's sort of a synonym for the present moment of experience is. And the notion that that's going to cease is an abstraction which is occurring in your imagination in the present moment. Right? Does the present moment ever cease? You know, when you go to sleep, does the present moment cease? When you're in deep anesthesia, does the present moment cease? Its character we may say it has a wildly divergent range of possibilities of what it can look like, but does it ever actually go out of being? Does it ever actually come into being? You know, and again, I'm not suggesting these are simple questions, but I'm suggesting they're interesting ones. Mm-hmm. And we can look at these questions because we have the present moment right here, most intimately, to examine, to explore, to investigate, and it may turn out to be much more subtle and nuanced and interesting than we're used to thinking of it as being. We're used to thinking the present moment it's just now, it's just now. Okay, interesting, but this just now is what? Well, it seems to be everything, doesn't it? You can't find anything else. So, in terms of investigation, what we mean by the present moment is everything, and yet it's also instantaneous, which is very interesting. Does that mean that there's a limitation? Does that mean that there's more, and this instantaneousness is somehow a piece of some larger continuum? Is there evidence for that? I mean, that's a notion we have, a fantasy of history, this vast spread of limitless time, and the present moment is somehow a tiny infinitesimal piece of that. And that's a sophisticated notion. It's an idea, but can we find any? What's the evidence for that? Is there any basis for that in investigation? When I look at all of that here now, all I find is this instantaneousness. I don't find any history. I don't find any continuity. Those are ideas. Those are abstractions that I find now, right? And so I'm not suggesting there's a simple answer to this question, but I'm suggesting the question may be a lot more subtle and nuanced than it might seem to be at first. So, in other words, if you investigate the present moment, you may actually find eternity.
Thank you.
So this may be semantics, but the this is and the I am, the equivalence you're talking about. It seems for me the word I has been used so long to refer to the physical, individual, separate person,
Right.
that I guess this is more a comment, to say this, it's tricky for me at this time to have the complete feeling sense of I am being equivalent to this is.
Okay. So the physical person, where do you find it?
Well,
where is it?
I knew you were going to say that. But I mean, the logical examination, I mean, all the illogicalness of using the word I on the seemingly concrete person, which it is not.
Well, you say it's not. Where do you find the concrete person? If you find the this and the concrete person and the I in the same place, why suppose they're three different things just because they're three different words? If you look for the I, where are you going to find it? If you look for a concrete person, where are you going to find it? If you look for this, where are you going to find it? You're going to look in the same place for all three.
What I mean is that when I use the word I, habitually the word is co-opted to mean certain things that, illogically, I would even say, to point to particular experiences, thoughts that gets labeled as I. And those things are ever changing and disappears and is never constant. So in that sense, there isn't any real personal separate I because it cannot be found.
Okay.
But yet, habitually, the word I has so much weight, referring illogically to these ever appearing and disappearing things. Right. So in a way, the I really never can point to anything.
Right.
I mean, there's no direct
If it doesn't refer to anything, then it means nothing, so it has no weight. And if you give it weight, then that's insane, isn't it?
The word
sure.
I, the way I'm describing it.
Yeah, if it refers to nothing, then why give it any weight?
No logical reason except for habit.
Well, then it's just insanity.
Yeah, the habit is insane, yet the habit has a certain weight of its own.
Yeah, but it may or may not. I mean, smoking may have a certain weight of its own, but people quit smoking all the time.
Right.
So you can indulge these habits, or you can nip them in the bud.
No, and
hypothetically.
I'm not insisting that I must have this. I'm more describing that it seems like the habit is more a comment on what seems to be happening, that the habit of the word I referring to a non-existing entity is strong.
Maybe.
That's the comment.
Yeah, it may or may not be strong.
May or may not be strong.
Sure.
What do you mean may or may not be strong?
It's individual based. To say it's strong in some objective sense that it's just out there, here it is and it's strong.
Okay.
You can say it's strong for me, or it's not strong for me, or I imagine it might be strong for someone.
Oh, I'm not talking about anyone else.
Yeah.
So just
Yeah.
me.
Well, if that may be the case, but it's not necessarily so. I mean, it may be the case right at this moment, but there was a time when it wasn't. There was a time when, before you could speak, when it wasn't a habit.
True.
And there may come a time when it's less of a habit for
Yes.
one reason or another.
Yes. And that's why I'm not exactly having just a comment on what seems to be the case, that because of that habit, the term I am is much harder to expand it out, so to speak, to equivalent to this is. But although I get what you point to when you say that those are equivalent, I'm just commenting on how or why I'm seeing that it's a difficulty. Well, it's not. I mean, not that it's a problem exactly. Just if I might move on to this, the other thing you said earlier was that being and experience, that there's always being, experience and being. And again, maybe it's a matter of semantics. What about in deep sleep then? To me, there's no experience in deep sleep.
Of course there's experience.
How so?
It's just subtle experience. It's not, of course, obvious experience. It's a subtle experience. It's an irrational experience. It's not an experience that you're commenting on or have a narration about or have an interpretation of, but it's not nothing. When you wake up in the morning, you don't feel like you were first emerging out of non-existence. There's some subtle sense of continuity where you are emerging from something. You're not just all of a sudden, being created anew, right?
Say.
Well, you can investigate that and consider it as a possibility and see for yourself if it's an interesting thing to look into. I'm suggesting it, and you may or may not find that interesting.
And that's why I'm thinking perhaps it's just semantics, because when I use the word experience, I'm talking. I think of it as. Perceptions and thoughts and sensations and so on. And in deep sleep, there isn't that kind of any of those.
Maybe not those things you would specifically designate as such, but it's not necessarily nothing. And if it's not nothing, then it's something. And if it's something, I think you could fairly use the word experience for it.
Oh, okay, yeah. So because I'm not asserting that there is nothing with a capital N. No, I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
But
if there's anything, I would say if you look, it exists in awareness in some sense, whatever that is. Yeah. And if it's phenomena in awareness, then to me that's a pretty good definition of experience. Yeah. And I would say that if there's being, there is phenomena in awareness. I would say those are synonyms. But I invite you to investigate for yourself and see what you find.
No, I hear what you're saying, and I think I'm a little bit just not using the same words in the same way as you.
The words are arbitrary. The important thing is the event itself, not the words we use. Yeah.
Another question, this one from Washington, D.C. You have the comment.
Hi, Frank.
You often comment that this is divine. However, doesn't that imply that there are things that are not divine? If so, where are those non-divine things?
No, it does not. This alone exists, and so if this is divine, then there are no non-divine things. On the other hand, this is not a thing, so arguably there's no divine things either. Boy, we're just getting lost in our words tonight. Yeah, we got a few to go. I can check a few off the list, but we're not pushing the limit here. the time. Well, good night, everybody. Thanks very much for coming. And I will be here 2 weeks from tonight, I believe. And I hope you enjoy whatever befalls you next, if anything.